So the Daily Wire offered Steven Crowder $50 million for 4 years. And saying that out loud, I realize I still haven't fully processed it. The Daily Wire offered Steven Crowder $50 million for 4 years. A Canadian YouTuber got offered basically NFL quarterback money. Maybe not top 10 NFL quarterback money, not Tom Brady money, but NFL quarterback money nonetheless. Vinny Testaverde money, at any rate. And this was just the spitball opening offer, apparently, which Crowder took as a tremendous insult because can you imagine only getting paid $240,000 a week for doing 4 YouTube videos and the occasional live stream, maybe a personal appearance here and there? In fact, Crowder was so insulted he did a whole big video about just how insulting it all was, which led to Jeremy Boring doing his own hour-long rebuttal video about how insulting it was that Crowder was insulted, which leads me to my point. Mr. Boring, Jeremy, if I may, since I couldn't help noticing your company appears to be in the market for top-line talent, I am willing to step in and solve your problem. And I'll tell you what else I'm willing to do for you today. Not only will I happily sign the contract that Crowder rejected, but in the interest of magnanimity and team building, I will allow you to erase 1-0. 4 years, $5 million, $24,038 a week. But before you go lunging for the dotted line, I do have some terms we need to discuss, and I am afraid these items are non-negotiable. First of all, I am nothing without my producer. Where Jim Eagle goes, I go, and vice versa. We met all the way back when I was doing Spanish language talk radio, the overnight shift on Radio Honduras, and he has been my wingman ever since. And you know, we have had lots of requests for Jim Eagle to appear on camera. I have encouraged him as best I can, but he just cannot overcome his crippling shyness. But if you want to imagine what he does look like, do you remember a show called Renegade with Lorenzo Lamas? Do you remember his loyal Native American sidekick from that show, Bobby Sixkiller, played by the legendary and much beloved character actor Branscombe Richmond? That is exactly what Jim Eagle looks like. The point being, he has got to be in the car, or else these negotiations, I'm afraid they are at an end. And as far as his compensation goes, you will have to negotiate with him on your own. I ain't his daddy, and I ain't his agent. Just don't give him any gasoline, because he's no good when he's drunk. Oh, anyway, Jeremy? May I call you Jeremy? Did I ask you that already? It just sounds weird to say Mr. Boring, like I'm insulting you for being a bad conversationalist. But I've got a few other requirements I would like us to go over before we make this thing official. First of all, I need you to get me the fuck out of California. I'm not all that picky about where you send me, just, let's say, not any state that touches the Pacific. I would be fine with Alaska, though, so let me amend the previous request to say, no state in the lower 48 that touches the Pacific. That leaves 45 states, which I think that's more than reasonable. I know you guys are headquartered in Nashville now, which that's fine by me, since most of my friends on YouTube reside in the former Confederacy and look like Civil War reenactors, maybe it's fitting that I should just migrate in that general direction. Also, I will require a hair and makeup girl. Brunette, 5'6" to 5'9", preferably a military history major, buxom but not too busty, shapely hips, and a nice heart-shaped backside. And I'm not opposed to a classy British accent. Oh, and if she can make sandwiches, that's also a plus. You know what else I want? I want a badass hockey jersey with my channel crest on the front, and I want it to say Curmudgeon number 19 on the back. Additionally, I'm going to need a brand new full-size pickup truck, preferably a Chevy Silverado. I'm not picky about color, and a company gas card also. For my studio, I'd like something that makes it abundantly clear that I am not just an older, more experienced, better-looking, funnier, more erudite version of Matt Walsh. So nothing too woodsy or rustic, no banjos in the background, and do not even think about trying to dress me up like a lumberjack. As far as the merch goes, I am willing to give you guys a 50-50 split on everything I sell at Curmudgeon Shop for the duration of the deal, and that's kind of a sweetheart arrangement for you guys, so you're welcome! Last item, before we get to signing any documents, I'd like to fly into Nashville, at your expense, obviously, and have my IT engineers inspect your servers and infrastructure. I'm going to be bringing all of Curmudgeon Nation over there with me. And while I won't say we've got an army, we do have about 3.5 platoons. And I just want to make sure you guys are well equipped to cope with all of the additional bandwidth you're going to require when I bring these hordes of people over there. Anyway, Jeremy, I'm glad we had this chance to talk. My people will be in touch with your people to arrange the signing ceremony. Jim Eagle and I are looking very much forward to joining your team. See, look how excited he is. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where I am not one to keep score, and I take no pleasure in being right, but I did tell you 14 months ago that Alec Baldwin and the jello-haired part-time internet model were both going to be charged with manslaughter. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Happy Friday. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And I actually wrote tonight's open last night in a rather marked departure from my normal process, and when I wrote it, I wasn't intending on devoting the whole episode to the Crowder boring incident of 2023, but then I spent all day today watching the damn thing spiral even further out of control and just watching Steven Crowder make an incredible horse's ass of himself, and it occurs to me that since contractual negotiation is a professional vineyard in which I toil with fairly alarming regularity, I might actually have one or two useful insights to offer, but before I go ripping into people and telling them how bad their behavior is, I want to open by first focusing on the encouraging and the positive and the uplifting. The fact that the Daily Wire is in a position to make a $50 million offer for on-air talent, that is stupendous. The fact that Steven Crowder has built his personal brand into such a position that he can be insulted by a $15 million contract offer, that is also stupendous. If you're a fan of programs like this one, you should be celebrating both of those things. Why? Because Steven Crowder and the Daily Wire both got to where they are today without the involvement or the approval of the mainstream media establishment. In fact, they've both managed to prosper and thrive in the face of open and direct opposition, not just from the media establishment, but from the political establishment too, and not to mention the big tech oligarchs, who would love nothing more than if the earth just opened up and swallowed every single political commentator to the right of Leon Trotsky. And they aren't too bashful about making sure that everybody knows that either. So this is proof that despite every thumb being on the scale that can be on the scale, the forces of reason and sanity are winning the culture war. This is proof that it really is possible for people who think and speak and write outside the auspices of establishment, approbation, and approval to build their own parallel intellectual and economic ecosystem. And to have it be a place where people and companies can fulfill the promise of the American dream, or the Canadian dream, as the case may be, and do perfectly well for themselves and have upward mobility and make metric shit tons of money in the process, while all of the pearl-clutching panty-waist performance artists in the mainstream press howl at the moon demanding more state censorship of unapproved ideas. I am a fan of Steven Crowder. And I think his greatest talent, frankly, is as a parody songwriter. I think he is the closest thing in the current generation to a Weird Al Yankovic. I also enjoy his monologue segments that he opens his show with, but as soon as it gets into the main part of the show, when it's four guys all talking at the same time, I switch to something else. I don't like shows with lots of people talking all at once. 2 people is perfect. I'm willing to tolerate 3 occasionally, but 4 or more, just shoot me in the face. I don't like it. But aside from being a funny and talented guy, I think Crowder has also performed valuable public service, particularly with the Change My Mind series, which, if you've never seen it, he goes to some woke university, he sets up a table, he unfurls a banner with some heretical statement on it like, there are only 2 genders, change my mind. You know, something that is bound to get the college kids whipped up into a nice proper lather, and then he spends a couple of hours tending an open mic, basically, letting these kids come up and just make idiots of themselves with their laughable justifications of all the things that they have been instructed to believe, but have never really thought about. And Crowder, he's a perfect gentleman the whole time. He's unfailingly cordial and polite, which is saying a lot when your normal everyday gig is heaping mockery, and deservedly so, upon the stupidity of these exact same people and these exact same ideas. And you'd like to think he would display the same sort of cordiality and politeness toward people who consider themselves his friends and have for a decade or more, as Jeremy Boring and Ben Shapiro from the Daily Wire have and do, but in this case, for reasons that are known only to himself, Steven Crowder opted to go in a decidedly different direction. The origin of this whole thing, as best I understand it, is that these guys were just having a friendly chat about future plans, just shooting the shit over beers, more or less, and Boring says to Crowder, just throwing it out there, but would you ever think about coming to work for us? And Crowder says, I don't know, maybe. Shoot me an offer and I'll have a look at it. Which Boring then did. Now, here's the way these things normally work when two parties are contemplating entering into a potentially long-term business relationship. The party performing the service says, send me over a sample contract. I'll have a look. And then the party paying for the service says, sure, no problem. We'll send over a boilerplate agreement. It's not an actual offer of anything, but go ahead and mark it up, redline it, send it back, and when it comes time to type up an actual contract, then we'll either omit the things you object to, or we will change the language to something that you're more comfortable with. And that's what Jeremy Boring sent to Steven Crowder. He sent him a boilerplate contract. $50 million for 4 years may not have even been an actual offer. It may have been something they typed just so there would be a number on the line instead of a blank space. Who even knows? And if it was an actual offer, do you really have this little understanding of how contract negotiations work, Stephen? Because I'm going to clue you in on a trade secret. You don't open with your best and final offer. You open with fewer years and less money than you're actually willing to pay. If the Daily Wire opened with 4 years, $50 million, it probably wouldn't have been much trouble at all getting them to 5 years, $75 million. Or if it really is that much of an insult, you do have the option of saying, no, fuck off, I don't want to work for you, and just going about your business. But jumping on YouTube and putting the contract language up on the screen and going through it in painstaking detail all about how terribly insulted you are by everything, that is not a good look. But it turns out Crowder did treat the opening offer as a serious one, because he made a counteroffer of $30 million per year, which that's no longer Vinny Testaverde money. That is straight up Tom Brady money. And it's also 2.5 times the original offer. And look, when I say an opening offer is always significantly less than the party is actually willing to pay, I'm not talking about 240%. Maybe 12, 15, something like that. So Crowder has a very public bitch fit about how very insulted he is. And his defenders, whose numbers seem to be dwindling rather quickly, it has to be said, they said it's okay that he did this, since he never actually named the Daily Wire as the party that was making the contract offer, because, it might be some other conservative media company that's in a position to be making $50 million contract offers. It could be anybody. And as a quick aside here, as I couldn't help noticing throughout yesterday and today, that the same thing has happened here that seems to happen whenever there is a disagreement between two public figures, and that's that everybody has to publicly declare whose side they are on. So the past 2 days I've been noticing every conservative talker on YouTube, feverishly rushing out their video declarations of whether they're on Team Jeremy or Team Stephen, because, heaven forbid you just cover a story dispassionately without placing yourself into one camp or the other. All right, folks, this guy is the hero. This guy is the villain. Please go about your lives now. And I know a lot of you youngsters will be flummoxed by what I am about to say, but here it is. It is possible for two guys to be self-important assholes at the same time. It's also possible for two guys to have a disagreement and both be right, or both be wrong, or both be right and wrong. In fact, life is replete with all manner of these shades of gray. It happens very seldom in a public disagreement between public figures that one guy is 100% in the right and the other guy is 100% in the wrong. But having said that, this case is pretty close to that. You gotta say, because I don't have the faintest idea what Steven Crowder thinks he's trying to achieve here. His stated justification is that he found certain clauses in the contract to be exploitative, and so he's performing a public service by showing young, up-and-coming content creators the sort of stuff that they need to be watching out for. But that strikes me as rather a load of bullshit, frankly. And again, I would expect a man in his position to at least have a basic level of familiarity with how contract negotiations work. But he appears not to. If there's a clause in the contract that you don't like, you take out your red pencil, you draw a line right through that son of a bitch, and you send it back. And then the other party has to decide whether they are willing to execute the contract without that clause in it. And that's when you often get a phone call saying, well, is this clause going to be a deal breaker? Or can we rephrase it into terms that are more agreeable to your side, but where my side still has some protection against such and such eventuality? If you're dealing with a 50-page contract, you might have 2 or 3 of those items on every single page, and that is why it sometimes takes weeks or months to hammer out a contract whose language is mutually agreeable to all the parties. But then, yesterday, in a move that has to be fairly unprecedented in world history, Jeremy Boring makes an hour-long video in which he says, yes, we were the ones who made the offer to Steven Crowder, and I'm going to sit here for the next 53 minutes and go over every single line and jot and tittle, which he did. And he directly rebutted every claim that was made in the Crowder video, at which point it was time for Crowder to say, this is not going well for me. This is not how I intended this. I misjudged the situation, so I need to just lay low and not say anything for a day or two, at least. And again, for reasons known only to himself, he decided to go a different route. In fact, he did just about the sleaziest thing you can do to somebody who considers you a friend, and that is secretly recording a private phone call and then disseminating it to the public. That is some straight-up Linda Tripp, Monica Lewinsky shit right there. That is positively shameful. I do not know enough adjective to properly describe how messed up that is. But that is what Steven Crowder did. Jeremy Boring called him up to say, I'm not sure what's happened here, but I think you've taken things the wrong way, and it doesn't benefit anybody for us to be having a pissing match with each other in public. And it seems like there has to be premeditation there, which might be the most troubling thing of all. You can't decide to record a phone call on the spur of the moment. You have to be planning on recording it. And to do that to somebody whose only crime was to offer you $50 million, who is calling up trying to bury the hatchet and mend fences, that is freaking mental. But since we are talking about NFL quarterback money here, I wonder if Crowder has thought about things in their proper perspective. Actually, I don't wonder that, because I know he hasn't. He thinks it's beyond the pale of offensiveness to have a stipulation in his contract saying his pay gets docked if he gets banned from YouTube. And as I understand it, that was the most serious complaint he had. But dude, if this was an athletic contract for the same years and the same amount of money, there would be pages and pages and pages of personal conduct clauses. They would tell you what you're allowed to eat, how much you're allowed to weigh, what kind of vehicles you're allowed to travel in, what kind of leisure activities you're allowed to do. Oh, and also you have to piss in a Dixie cup twice a week for the duration of the agreement. And that's just scratching the surface. There are personal conduct clauses in sports contracts that are so esoteric they would make your head spin. And Steven Crowder is upset about a clause that basically says, well, if you lose the ability to deliver the contract that you're contractually obliged to deliver, and our company thus loses the revenue we are paying you to create, and it's because of something you said or did, then we reserve the right to dock your paycheck accordingly. Which they do. There's nothing unreasonable or insulting about that clause and that language being in that contract. As a practical matter, it's the same as an injury clause in a sports contract. If you get hurt in week 1 and your ass goes on the injured reserve, then you don't get paid the same amount you would get if you were on the active roster for the whole season. You get 70% or 80% or whatever it is. Every talent contract in every industry in the world contains clauses like that, and everybody except Steven Crowder seems to understand that it's nothing personal. You can't just guarantee somebody 4 years and $50 million and let the whole thing ride on good faith and a handshake. It would be great if the world worked that way, but it doesn't. And if I could give Steven Crowder one 2-word bit of advice, it would be this. Stop talking. You have worked too hard for too long and built up too much credibility with too many people to go pissing it all away on something as stupid as this crazy overreaction to a fairly mundane bit of boilerplate contract language. But enough about that. Jim Eagle, you and I need to start packing for Nashville, my friend. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Have a delightful and edifying weekend with those you love. See you next week. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.